Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Spincast. Today, we have Justin, aka MetaPusher, with us. He is the current head coach of the Valorant team for Charlotte Phoenix. He used to coach Paladins as well with Team Envy and among another number of other things as well. So without further ado, Justin, MetaPusher, go ahead, introduce yourself. Tell us what sparked everything with esports, how you kind of came from, like we were talking before, the traditional sports background into the esports coaching world, and kind of like what all went into that.
So I'm Justin. I go by MetaPusher, and if we're talking usernames, I've been coaching esports full time for around 4 years now. But I've been a gamer my entire life, dating back to when I was like 6 or 7 playing on like the original PlayStation 1. So gaming's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And after college and I was working normal jobs, I was still playing in all my free time. Ended up realizing I didn't have too much potential as a player, so I just offered to coach some of my friends, and then just slowly worked my way up onto better teams, and found my way into a position in Paladins where I could actually quit my job and do it full time. And the rest has just been, carrying on, and luckily I've had a fair bit of success, so
Awesome.
I think I'm doing pretty well.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic. So my first question for you would be kind of just take us through your coaching process, right? What do you like to focus on? What do you think helps most with the players, just in general with that?
So a lot of it is honestly, there's a lot of management side of things, whereas as opposed to like actually telling a player what to do, because for the most part, once you're coaching a team that's sort of at the high level, you don't really have to do much in terms of telling them specifically what they're doing wrong, whether it's like aiming or movement or anything. The players are very good at self-policing in terms of that. So there's a lot of getting them on very regimented schedules, practice-wise, sleep. It's a little bit difficult controlling players' sleep and like eating schedule when you're not in person with them. So you just do the best you can. But so most of my time is scheduling practice. I spend every practice that the team has, I sit in on, and if I'm able to spectate, depending on who we're practicing or what the specifics of it, I'll be able to sit in and record, and we can watch things back later on. For the most part though, I don't butt in during practice or tournament matches, just because as a general rule of thumb with like Riot Games and what I expect to have for the future of Valorant is coaches aren't allowed to communicate with players while they're playing a match. Mm-hmm. So I try and simulate that as much as possible during practice and let them make all the decisions on their own, and then talk to them afterwards in a kind of retrospective manner.
Yeah, for sure. Love to see that support basis in the managerial side of things as well, because I think that's something that really gets lost in esports a lot. Is so many people get focused on the in-game stuff that they don't realize, like, hey, I'm not sleeping right, or hey, I'm not eating right, and then all of a sudden that starts to affect their performance. One thing that we did touch on before the podcast started was that you lived in a team house at one point, and you kind of touched on it in our response there. So talk us through like the similarities and differences of being able to be in person with your team, what that kind of helps with developing the players continuously, looking for improvement and success.
So there's a lot of pros and cons to living in a team house, especially as a coach living in the house with the players. I'm able to really know what they're doing all the time. If somebody sleeps in, they can't just message me on Discord and tell me that they're out grabbing groceries or something, and they didn't just wake up at 1 p.m. I actually know what you're doing at all times. And so there's a lot of benefits there. There's also negative sides to that. I kind of had the realization when I was living in this house, which was in Atlanta for my former Paladins team, was that there's a bit of negative that can come with living with somebody who is sort of in charge of you. Like I felt like it would be nice for my players to have space and free time away from a watching eye and feeling like they're being judged for everything they do 24/7. So I've kind of decided that for future team house situations, I'm going to probably exclude myself, let the players live in it by themselves, and I would just show up when it's time to work. Try and establish like a nice work-life balance.
Yeah, 100%. Like that's something that's so key right there with work-life balance with esports that I think is also overlooked a little bit for sure. I always envision team houses of like kind of like a complex in one day, right? Where the coaches have their own little section, right, that they can go and close the door. and then the players can go, party, have a good time, whatever.
Yeah, for us it was all 6 PCs, so my PC and the coaches and all 5 of the players' PCs in sharing a room, and that was also that was all of our personal setups as well. So even if you wanted to have time alone to game or play with your friends who aren't on the team, you always have the people gathered around you.
Yeah. I feel like that would just be stressful at some points for sure, especially like, you said, you just want a night to chill with your, past friends that aren't, living with you. That would definitely be a little annoying eventually for sure. So kind of touching on another point, moving to the next question with traditional sports, right? You've mentioned your history with traditional sports and track and fields. Talk us through some of those similarities and differences between, high level physical sports, traditional sports, and then high level esports as well.
There's definitely a lot of similarities. The amount of work that traditional sports players put in and high level esports players is honestly really comparable. Whereas traditional sports, you're doing physical stuff, you're training, you can isolate very small things. Whereas like in esports, a lot of the players, you just kind of blanket practice as much as possible. So the same amount of dedication and effort is really required from esports players. In terms of like coaching, there's actually a very significant difference between traditional sports coaches and esports coaches. Like I have vivid memories of when I was playing sports that weren't track and field, and you could be yelled at. Like if you do something wrong, your coach can make you go run laps and stuff, and that's not really an option I have as an esports coach. It'd be pretty weird of me to try and like make my players do push-ups when they have a really bad game or anything. So there's crossover in weird ways and a lot of things that also really don't cross over. Ultimately, I think any form of competition is going to have similarities. So if you want to be the top level at any sort of competitive sport or esport, it takes, a different breed.
Yeah, 100%. You actually touched on like a really interesting point that I'd love to expand a little bit is kind of like keeping the players in check. Like you said, like I grew up playing football. So if we messed up or we weren't acting right in class, then we went to the field for practice and we were running laps or, doing some really painful drills that no one ever wants to do. So kind of looking at like the evolution of coaching with esports, right? Since esports still is so new compared to traditional sports, which are hundreds of years old. Do you ever see some sort of system, maybe not, physically like push-ups, like you said, but like an easier way to keep players in check? Because I think especially in esports, especially in the online sense, a lot of players just like, oh, I can kind of do whatever I want. And if I mess up, whatever. But kind of like making sure the team stays at home within themselves and making sure everyone is like responsible for like their own actions and like mess ups, so to say.
Yeah, I think there definitely be like techniques that different coaches use. It's just kind of what you can get away with as a coach, because you want to be able to force the players to do certain things and to think a certain way, but you don't want to turn them off of your influence. If you give them bad advice in certain occasions and they take it, they might start doubting. One thing that I kind of do is I like to, instead of like I said, forcing them to run laps or do push-ups, I just like to roast my players. I find it's a good way to keep things light, and also like if you actually played bad, I'm gonna tell you played bad, and I might make fun of you a little bit for it. Obviously, everything we do is pretty private. I'm not gonna like jump up on a stage and call one of my players trash, but when we're practicing, I'll be 100% honest with them. And I think that a lot of the things that you do in traditional sports eventually will be able, are semi-plausible for esports once people are grouped up. Like obviously with the current like health crisis, it makes things very difficult. But we like when we were in our team house for Paladins, you could do some sort of push-up thing like that. If you have a practice where you go triple negative and you're clearly really bad, but it could be an agreed upon thing. It's like you got to do a push-up for every death that you weren't even for and stuff, things like that.
Yeah, I think that the team house concept still goes a long way in like, team bonding and those kind of ideas of really bringing that team together, like you're saying. One thing, kind of transitioning a little bit, focusing a little bit more on the players. You've been a coach, 2 different games now. There's, that trope that goes around that players are always looking for greener pastures instead of trying to make their pasture greener. So in recruiting players or trying to like maintain a certain roster, are there any like practices or ideas that like you like to employ to kind of like help develop an entire team over time, rather than just trying to like put together the best pieces as soon as you could, for example?
Well, it's difficult when you're initially building a roster. This is something that I didn't have too much experience with before Valorant and making this team with the Charlotte Phoenix. It's very difficult before you have like a solid group of 3 to 4. Once you get the core, I've found it's much easier to look for the final piece, because it's easy to talk to those core players or just look at them from an outside perspective and see what you need to add to get it. So the most difficult part is finding the core, and ultimately I like to look for people who are willing to work. They're willing to be criticized, because as a coach, a lot of what I do is criticizing them, and also the player to player, there's a lot of criticism back and forth within a team. So if you're not able to take criticism, you're likely not going to go far. And I think, I mean, obviously, in-game mechanics of whatever game you're trying to build a roster of are important to look at. But I think more importantly than that is communication, because ultimately, I think the biggest thing about esports as opposed to traditional sports is the importance in communication between players. There is obviously a lot of communication, but in traditional sports, but it can kind of be trumped by outstanding physical ability. And it's much rarer in esports for somebody to be so mechanically gifted that they don't need to communicate. And really, I think completely impossible for a whole team to be so good that they don't have to communicate. Like, you can find teams who are much worse than a team they're playing, and if they communicate well and play as a team together, they're able to beat a team who should be beating them. So communication is one of the main things that I look at when recruiting and building a team.
Yeah, 100%. Communication is so directly tied in, like, how good the team is. And like you said, how well they communicate usually, enables success. There was a ton of teams. I remember I followed the Rainbow Six Siege scene a long time in the professional sense, that the teams that communicate the best, that have that experience, usually win over just these guys that are so extremely mechanically gifted. They're great shots, so to say, but you can tell that they're young. They don't have that experience of communication, and they start to falter against some of the more established teams that you can tell are everything's on point. They're all on the exact same page.
You'd be surprised in most esports, everybody kind of assumes that the people at the top level, like the pro players, the ones who are in either like a pro league or who are getting salaried by big organizations, they feel like these players are just gifted at a level that you couldn't compete. But the truth is, in like the tier 2 scene and below, there's probably hundreds of people who can play the game, who can who can execute the mechanics at the same level as those. It's the things outside of your actual mechanics that distinguish and make the best of the best.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there might even be an argument that there are some people, like in ranked and public matches, that are mechanically just a bit better, because that's what they focus on. They don't, but then they actually try to throw together a squad of ranked stars, so to say, and go against a professional team. They just get absolutely.
I'm bouncing all over the place right now, because now I'm starting to think that maybe they're actually not mechanically better. It's just if you don't have to worry about communication and all the things that come with being a part of a team, you can actually focus more on your mechanics. So I'm not sure what the exact answer there is.
Yeah. I think it's just right there. There's something there, but it's very hard to define. I mean, esports is still incredibly new in that sense. Yeah. And, there's only been a couple pro scenes that's been around for more than 5 years at the minimum. So yeah, that is a very interesting kind of dilemma. It's like, how are some of these kids, like, you turn on a streamer that's a professional player, and they're like, holy, they're like, I'm being slammed by this random player online, but then they get into like an actual competitive match and they're doing the slamming. So it's crazy to see those differences. Kind of looking towards the future, for my last question here before we run out of time is, you've been, exposed to 2 scenes now, Valorant being extremely new and then Paladins kind of dissolving lately. What do you think esports is like missing the most for like that next big step, right? Esports is growing incredibly fast. But I still think it's kind of like a toddler right now. A lot of great things, a lot of room for growth. But I think esports is going to become way bigger than it currently is. So what is that thing that you think might be missing or needs to be improved upon to really bring esports into that mainstream facet, the same way the NFL is or European soccer?
That's a tough question, because I think it needs a lot. I think the easiest answer is just is time, but that feels like a cop-out answer, so I'm not going to go with that. I think the most important thing is like in-person events, because that's really what will convince somebody who is a disbeliever in esports that esports is a real thing. Like, you can say it's just people playing games or whatever, but when you go to like a stadium where you watch a world championship and you see hundreds of thousands of people gathered in person and cheering, you get the same experience and the same vibe that you get from traditional sports. And like, developers like Riot and all the other big esports who are starting to do that. And once, the health crisis can actually allow them to do that, I think that's going to be the biggest thing. Because like, I remember the first experience I had with watching and getting into a Riot game was watching like a League of Legends World Championship a couple of years ago. And even the experience that you get just watching it and seeing it pan and seeing a whole crowd of people in Asia or wherever, it's definitely something that leaves an impact on you and makes you want to do it. And that the whole global reach of esports is, I think, what's eventually going to let it propel over most traditional sports. I think soccer probably has a chance to keep up with esports, but I think everything else will be left in the dust in 10, 20 years.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think, like you just said it right in the head. I think soccer is the only one that has the ability to compete, because that is, the world sport. Not here so much in America, but it's picking up fast.
Yeah.
Everywhere else, soccer by and far is massive. And I really do hope that LAN events come to fruition, because I kind of see, like, when I go to the Panthers game, right? I live in Charlotte. It's like a city event, right? Everyone's out, the bars are hopping, restaurants are super busy. There's a bunch of events, you might not even be going to the game, but you might tailgate and then go to a bar, or, try to like scalp some tickets and then go. I can see that for esports, where all of a sudden it's a city kind of event where everyone in the city gets riled up. Hey, my team's in town this week. They're playing so-and-so. It's going to be a big game. Let's go out, really experience it as a city or a region or a country. So that's obviously something fantastic. There's one thing I didn't touch on that I want to touch on real quick before we have to wrap up, unfortunately, is looking at Valorant specifically. It's a brand new game, right? It literally just released 3 weeks ago, and then had a beta period before it. Why choose Valorant? Why do you think Valorant has the potential to be that next big, the CS killer or the League of Legends killer? Maybe not League, but I think they're definitely competing with CS. Why did you pick it? Why did you dive into the coaching world there? What excites you about Valorant, and so on and so forth?
Well, I love FPS games, shooter style games. They've been, my addiction even before I got into coaching, and that's what I coached in Paladins. So Valorant seemed like a logical next move. And there's also, I have a lot of faith in the developers. Riot Games has done an amazing job turning League of Legends into a global esport. And the most important thing when it comes to an esport is developer support and what they're able to give back to the scene and the infrastructure that they can help develop over the, 3 to 4 years when a scene is developing. So Riot has shown that they're willing and able to turn a game into a successful esport where coaches, players, organizations can profit and make money off it. So it's just hopefully a lot of faith that I hope isn't misplaced, but it's a lot of faith in Riot.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more there. I think Riot is already proving to be way different in just how much they're allowing Valorant community tournaments just to happen, right? A lot of game developers or the companies don't allow for just community tournaments, or they have some sort of heavy restriction. So I'd love to see kind of just an open source approach of hey, let's all just embrace the esports side of the game and see where it takes us in a year before an established pro scene comes out that has dedicated.
And it's happening all over the world. I watched the Ignition series in South Africa and Japan and stuff over these past couple weeks, and I love it when things get global like that, because it just exposes anything and everything involved in it to such a bigger audience. And if you just limit yourselves to the mainstream markets in North America and Europe and stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Love to see it, because I think it's the best thing about esports, to kind of wrap things up, is that esports really is geared and it's destined to be a competition with no barriers, right? There's very low barrier to entry. You can play across borders, across countries, across regions, doesn't matter, as long as you don't really care about the ping. But maybe that'll get fixed eventually with new technology. But it's really something that everyone kind of come together and have the ability to enjoy at the same level at the same time. So that's absolutely beautiful to see and hope for. So unfortunately, we are out of time. Absolutely fantastic discussion with MetaPusher here, an excellent coach. Hope to see more success with the Valorant team in the Charlotte Phoenix. Real quick, go ahead, plug yourself. If anybody out there wants to keep up with your team now or yourself in your work.
Well, if you want to follow me, I'm mostly on Twitter or Twitch. Just MetaPusher is my handle on everything. And if you want to keep track of our team, you can follow the Charlotte Phoenix, CLT Phoenix GG on Twitter. We're playing in pretty much every tournament that Valorant has to offer, and looking to make a name for, you know, ourselves in the city of Charlotte.
Yeah, awesome. Excited to see, like I said, Charlotte native. So excited to see, you know, an esports org brand with the Charlotte name as well. So that's awesome to see. So good luck to your future endeavors. Everyone out there, thanks for staying the entire time. Stay healthy and stay happy in the current very difficult times with the COVID-19 situation. Hopefully we can return to some sense of normalcy and get back to our beloved lands soon. But ultimately, stay plugged in.